Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this evening. So I'm going to be talking to you about a few things this evening. One is how I got involved in the Israel space, because it's kind of random on some level. And I'm also going to be talking to you about what I've done in my career thus far, and how I've applied it to some of the Israel content that I've built, and also what's next. And then I'm hoping that we can turn this monologue into a dialogue afterwards and get any questions, concerns, feedback from you guys. So how do I get involved in the Israel space? Because I'm not Jewish, and so where does this interest in Israel come from, you may be wondering. I'm originally from New Orleans. I grew up in a very atypical Christian family. As a Christian, I grew up observing Shabbat and keeping kosher style and keeping all the holy days, which made for a very interesting / weird upbringing. I'll tell you two stories that really illustrate my experience growing up in this way, because this experience really helped shape my identity, as you can imagine. So, how many here are familiar with the Holiday of Yom Kippur? Raise your hand. Okay, so all of you, as far as I can tell. So in the Jewish tradition, for Yom Kippur, you start fasting around Bat Mitzvah age, which is 12, 13 years old. But my parents didn't have the rabbinical text to advise them on what age you should start fasting for Yom Kippur. So they decided to, for some reason, make it up as they went along, and decided that 5 years old would be a good time for their kids to start fasting for Yom Kippur. So I've been fasting for Yom Kippur since I was 5. That's just one weird story. Another story is, show of hands, how many of you know what Sukkot is? Okay, so less. Okay, so Sukkot, for those of you who don't know, is another holy day in the Jewish religion, and basically what you're called to do is build a sukkah, what's called a sukkah, outside of your house. It's like a temporary hut, basically, without windows or anything like that, or doors, and the idea is you sit in the sukkah and you eat, and you discuss different things about life. And the idea is to be reminded of what it looks like to exist in a temporary space. Things are temporary, things are fleeting, things pass away, so let's be aware of this. So in the actual text of the Bible, it doesn't specify what this temporary dwelling place should look like. So my parents decided to interpret it in, contemporary fashion. And they did so. They said, it says to stay in a temporary dwelling place. So we will go to Florida, naturally, and we will stay in condos, because condos are our temporary dwelling place. So that is how I grew up. Around September or October, depending upon when the holiday fell, my parents, and we belonged to a church that did this, so it wasn't just us, but my parents would take us out of school for 8 days in the middle of the semester, and we would go to Florida, and we would stay in condos to celebrate our temporariness. So this is how I grew up, and naturally, I developed a love and an interest in Jewish culture, as I'm sure you can imagine. When I was 15 years old, my father introduced me to the writings of Leon Uris. Who here knows who Leon Uris is? Okay, so some of you? Okay, so Leon Uris was a really famous author who wrote about a lot about the reestablishment of the State of Israel, about Jewish life here in Europe, and also a whole host of a different set of books about the history of Ireland, which is interesting. But his most famous book was Exodus, which was about the reestablishment of the State of Israel. And it was a major motion picture in the 50s. Paul Newman starred in it. So it was really huge. And so I read all these books throughout high school. And this was my introduction to learning about contemporary Israeli society. And I went to a very egalitarian high school, which for some reason had a Hebrew culture club. I don't know why. So I joined that Hebrew culture club as well. So this was a part of my initial foray into the Israel space. And then I attended the University of New Orleans. And I initially majored in film, because film and screenwriting were my first loves. But then in 2012, something interesting in France happened. There was a rise in anti-Semitism. There was a shooting in Toulouse, France. Many of the Jewish institutions were attacked in France in that year. And at the time I was reading a book by Elie Wiesel called Dawn, which is in a series of books. Dawn actually follows his book Night, which is his most famous book. But Dawn, I think, is a book that is less well known. And I just remember being intrigued by this message in Dawn, which said, do not be indifferent to your surroundings, and do not be apathetic to your surroundings. So that really resonated with me, and so I decided to change majors from film to international studies. So I majored in international studies in the end, with a focus, a concentration in diplomacy. And I started a student pro-Israel organization where I did Israel advocacy for 3.5 years. And this Israel advocacy consisted of tabling events, inviting speakers to the university like this, both from America and from all over the world. There's also a school called Tulane University, which is about 20 minutes away from where I attended school. It has a very significant Jewish population. About 40% of the population there is Jewish. Some people call it Tulane because it's heavily Jewish. And so I also partnered with a lot of the students there to do Israel events, including throwing a festival on campus where the final year, my senior year, we actually invited Antisemitism to perform and various other local New Orleanian bands. So this is my university experience, delving into pro-Israel advocacy. I had a lot of successes, bless you. I had a lot of successes. I had a lot of failures. I learned a lot, but one of the important things that I learned was that communally, at least in America, I don't know how things are, communally and collectively we didn't know what we were doing in terms of Israel advocacy. We were doing things based upon faulty assumptions, trying to communicate to young people about Israel and Israeli society. And so I set about to try to figure out what we were doing wrong, and this sort of became my obsession on some level. And so after I graduated in 2015, I moved to New York because I received a Bartley Fellowship. I was accepted into a Bartley Fellowship program at the Wall Street Journal. So I was at the Wall Street Journal for a year. And the first 3 months, I wrote for the paper, wrote articles for the paper, helped my boss with research for his articles, etc. But for the remaining 9 months, I actually completed an 82-page thesis paper on the topic of Israel and millennials. What works, what doesn't, and how to make it better. And it is during that time where I decided, or I attempted to crack the code of what we were getting wrong. And during that time, I developed a theory of change called the Theory of Enchantment, which is essentially an attempt to be a psychology of connection, to figure out what we were doing wrong and how we could make it better. So during the course of writing this, I realized two important things. One, the first is the following. One is that we were confusing two very important questions. We were confusing the question of how to combat anti-Semitism, which is a very noble question, an important question, a question that really is what it got me interested in this Israel stuff in the first place, right? How to combat anti-Semitism. But the question of how to get young people to fall in love with Israelis. These are two totally different questions. The first question is essentially a question of how do you actually get people to stop hating, right? Which is, again, a noble question. How do you get people to stop hating? But the second question, how do you get people to fall in love with Israelis, is a question of how do you get people to start loving? And it is that central question that has animated the majority of my work following that research paper. So I began to ask this question, okay, well, if I want people to fall in love with something, then I have to ask, what are they already in love with? And how do I use that to get them to become in love with whatever I want them to become in love with, essentially? And so, for me, the biggest source of data that I could research in terms of figuring out what people were in love with was pop culture. Because pop culture is essentially what we are drawn to as human beings, right? Pop culture entails the type of music we listen to, the type of books we read, the type of singer-songwriters we gravitate toward, the type of companies that command huge amounts of attention, for example, like Nike. So I began to ask, why is it that we gravitate toward these types of different entities and influencers? What is the psychology of connection that is going on in terms of our attraction toward these different things? And so I began to study. I began to study, for example, what is it about Nike and Nike's slogan, "Just Do It," that attracts people from all over the world, especially young people, who see this mantra encapsulated in its product. And it says, buy this shoe, see this commercial. This commercial is saying that if you buy this shoe, you'll be able to fulfill your full potential in whatever realm you want to. So people see this and they buy Nike gear and believe that they can fulfill their full potential. Well, that's interesting because that means we're buying things that give us a sense of potential. So I said, okay, and I tabled that. And I began to probe my own personal interests. I asked myself, Chloe, why are you so obsessed with Beyonce? Like, what is it about Beyonce that you and other people gravitate toward? You know, how we take it for granted. I would assume people would be like, well, Chloe, it's Beyonce. It's self-evident why you would gravitate toward Beyonce. And I'm like, well, no, it's not self-evident. What is it about her music, her presence that people gravitate toward, and what can I learn about that? And so I began to probe into Beyonce, and I noticed that there's this similar thing. That when Beyonce says in her lyrics, "Who run the world, girls," we as women see ourselves and our potential embodied in that, and so we gravitate toward Beyonce. So there's something similarly happening in both Nike and in Beyonce's music. So I began to research all these other companies like Adidas. A lot of sports companies do this. Singer-songwriters like Beyonce and Justin Bieber and some other people who were at least more popular in 2015. And I began to ask, what is the common theme happening? And the common theme is essentially the definition of the theory of enchantment, which is on this board. Maybe we can, I don't know if it's, can we raise the board? Maybe. Can everyone see the board? Okay, well maybe we'll raise it if necessary. So what all these things have in common is the definition of the theory of enchantment. Thank you. And the theory of enchantment says if you want to get someone to fall in love with something or someone or some idea, you essentially have to create content in which your audience sees themselves and their potential reflected in the content. I'll say that one more time because I think it's important. You have to create content in which your audience sees themselves and their potential reflected in the content. This is often the reason why we connect to different things, whether they be companies, whether they be singer-songwriters, and other influencers in our lives. So, this is true. I mentioned the Nike mantra of "just do it," but it's also true of Nike commercials. Nike is famous for putting out commercials that really capture this. So there's a great commercial that I watched, hundreds of times when I was doing this research, and it's called "Look Me in the Eyes," and it's Michael Jordan doing the voiceover. And Michael Jordan, I'm not going to say the whole thing because I don't remember, but Michael Jordan says something like, "Look me in the eyes. I know that you're scared. You're scared of what I will become. I'm scared of what I won't become." And it's a really beautiful commercial because it's a bunch of young people who are trying to become things in their lives, right? And that really stayed with me. You're scared of what I will become. I'm scared of what I won't become. And then he says at the end, and this has always resonated with me, he said, "I have something more important than courage. I have patience." And then he says, "I will become what I know I am." And then the last slogan is "Become legendary." Right? And this is the advertising for Air Jordan, Nike Air Jordan, and this is why people buy the content. So we are attracted to things that connect us, and we often find that we are connected to things that enable us to fulfill our full potential, right? So I wrote this paper, and I joined an organization called Jerusalem U afterwards, which is a film and digital media company. Funny, because it went full circle, I got back to film somehow. And I tried to implement this theory of enchantment in a lot of the Israel content that we produce. And we produce documentaries. I'll just give you a few examples. We just finished producing a documentary called When the Smoke Clears, which is about trauma and PTSD in the IDF. We just produced also a film called Sustainable Nation, which is about how Israelis are taking water technology and helping different countries in Africa and India and my country in California, which is experiencing a drought right now. So we did all these things, and we're pivoting to YouTube, and we're producing a bunch of new YouTube series. But there's a great challenge still that I had to wrestle with, because I wanted to take this theory of enchantment and lecture all over the country about it. And I discovered, in particular, as I would speak to young Jewish students in high school, there was something missing. And what was missing, which is, I feel like always an elephant in the room when it comes to Israel, is how do you take the theory of enchantment and use it to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Is that even possible, Chloe? Can you take what you know about the psychology of connection and use it to generate connection in hostile areas? Can you take what you have discovered to be the science or the psychology of connection and use that connection to bring people who were disconnected back together again, right? So this was the second question that animated my ambition as I move forward, speaking on college campuses, but also in particular in high schools. So this really was the catalyst for developing a second part to the theory of enchantment. And the theory of enchantment, I should back up and explain what's happening in America in terms of on college campuses and with a lot of anti-Semitism happening on some college campuses. So in America, I'm not sure how it works here, but in America, the negative Israel conversation is a product of the framework in which that conversation takes place. And the framework is a framework called intersectionality. Has anyone heard of intersectionality? Okay, so many of you, but I'll explain what intersectionality is. I'll explain the history, and where it sort of goes wrong at some level. So intersectionality was a theory that was invented by a woman named Kimberly Crenshaw in law school in the late 1970s. Intersectionality makes three claims, one of which is true, two of which are false, and dangerously false. The first claim that it makes, which is true, is that it is possible to experience intersecting forms of oppression at one point in time. So I'll give you an example. I am a woman of color. As a woman of color, I can experience oppression by virtue of being a woman, and also I can experience oppression by virtue of being a person of color. And these are things that intersect and can manifest in different ways, right? So that element, that claim of intersectionality is true, 100% true. It is the other two claims that are problematic. The second claim it makes is that the primary motivator of all human interaction is power. So, I'll give you an example. I could be engaged in a conversation with a man who is white, and we can disagree over some political thing, and it will be assumed that this political disagreement is not happening in good faith, is not a legitimate disagreement that two people can have over or across each other. It will be assumed that this white man, by virtue of being white, is trying to enact power. And this is why he's disagreeing with me. He's trying to impose power on me, over me, etc. So that's the second claim that intersectionality makes, and it's problematic for a whole host of reasons, including the fact that disagreements can happen in good faith and can be totally legitimate without someone attempting to enact power in an oppressive way over you. So that's the second problematic claim that it makes. The third problematic conclusion that it comes to is one of racial essentialism. This is fascinating to me because I am someone who loves great literature, for example. And I think this idea is antithetical to the concept of great literature. So here's what I mean. Intersectionalists will take a basic human impulse, let's say entitlement, right? Anyone in the world can be entitled, can feel a sense of entitlement. I, for example, could have been working, and let's say I get a paycheck based upon hours. Let's say I get an hourly paycheck. And let's say yesterday I didn't feel like working that extra hour that I was supposed to be working, right? And so I know I'm not going to get a certain amount of money that I would have gotten if I had worked that extra hour. But it doesn't matter. I want the money. I feel entitled to the money. I'm feeling particularly entitled. I had a very nasty day today, so I don't care. I want the money and I feel entitled to it, right? So a sense of entitlement is something that any human being can experience across his or her life, right? Basic human impulse. But what the intersectionalist states is essentially that entitlement is a white male thing, right? It is exclusively the realm of the white male. And so entitlement becomes racially reduced or racially essentialized. And that's obviously problematic because we're human beings and we're not, stereotypes, and we're not, anyone is capable of exhibiting these various human behaviors. And so once you box people in and once you reduce them to certain things, once you say that they are a priori acting in a way that is quote-unquote white, whether white means entitled, whether white means oppressive, etc., you're actually dehumanizing people because you're not taking into account the fullness of their humanity. So this is the framework in which the Israel conversation takes place in America. And as a result, two things happen. One thing happens on a political level, and another thing happens on, I would say, an existential level. So on the political level, Jewish students who are left-wing, who are pro-Israel, come to social justice groups on campus and say, we want to be with you, we want to promote your cause, we would love to partner with you, etc. But then they are told, no, you can't be a part of our cause because you are white, because you are pro-Israel, and Israel is a quote-unquote white colonialist entity in the Middle East, and it is oppressing those brown Palestinian people. So you cannot be a part of us. In fact, not only can you not be a part of us, we will stigmatize you and make you persona non grata on campus. So that is the conclusion of the political analysis that happens insofar as it negatively affects young Jews who are left-leaning, who want to be active in social justice movements, but who are also pro-Israel. But on an existential level, and this is, I think, really getting at the heart of it, what happens is students are encouraged to prejudge each other. Students are encouraged to look at each other and say, oh, you are X skin color or you are Y skin color. You must have had the experience of XYZ. I am now going to place you into this box in my mind, in the back of my mind, and I'm going to essentially be dismissive of you because you fit into this box, and I can't deal with that, and you represent essentially evil to me. So students are being encouraged to prejudge one another, which is the definition of prejudice, which we've to a certain extent forgotten on the college campus in America. Students are encouraged to assume the worst about each other simply based on looks and on, let's say, financial status, whether real or perceived, whether having it or lack thereof, right? You are wealthy, so you are privileged and thus have no place in this conversation when it comes to a conversation about freedom. And students are encouraged to assume really bad intent. And as a result, we are left unable to deal with each other in a spirit of generosity. We are totally not taught how to deal with each other in a spirit of good faith and a spirit of positive intent. So this is really the existential level of harm that this framework is doing. It's breaking down our ability to communicate in a spirit of compassion. So the theory of enchantment, I was dealing with this framework and I said, well, how can the theory of enchantment offer or be an alternative framework with which we can guide our conversations, whether they be about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or other difficult conversations that we have to have in life. How can the theory of enchantment be a guide? Now, it's important to point out that the theory of enchantment is not a substitute for knowing the complexities about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One would have to be already well-versed on this topic to even begin to have a conversation, right? But what the theory aims to do is to help shape our conversations in a much more positive way, where we can actually move forward with each other in a spirit of positivity and a spirit of good faith. So, the theory of enchantment teaches three principles with which we can hopefully shape our conversations for the better. And each of these principles are supplemented by pop culture, because as I said, I am obsessed with pop culture. So they're supplemented with lessons from pop culture, but they're also supplemented with lessons from the real world. So the first principle is as follows. Israelis and Palestinians are human beings, not political abstractions. Because the first thing that happens on a college campus in America is that we start abstracting about the communities in this conflict. We turn the communities in this conflict into entities, into objects, as if they are entirely bereft of actual human beings, flesh and blood, who live just as we do, who have to navigate various insecurities and vulnerabilities and challenges that we do, and who are as complex as we are. And this oftentimes seems like a very basic, obvious, common sense principle, but I've discovered that on the college campus in America and in other problematic spaces, this is something that is thrown out of the window in our conversations. We turn people walking down the street, the stranger walking down the street, into political abstractions, let alone communities hundreds of miles away when we talk about what's going on there. So this is the first principle. Israelis and Palestinians are human beings, not political abstractions. So what's a pop culture reference that can supplement this principle? How many of you have heard of Kendrick Lamar? Okay, because of the last thing I was woefully disappointed. Okay, so Kendrick Lamar has a song called DNA. How many of you know this song? Okay. So in this song, DNA, he says, I got power, poison, pain, and joy inside my DNA. Right? And one of the things I try to teach students is to be active consumers of pop culture, not passive consumers of pop culture. Because oftentimes these artists are actually trying to teach us things about life. So Kendrick Lamar says, I got power, poison, pain, and joy inside my DNA. And what he is saying is that as human beings, we have all these complex things within us. We have the capacity to do good, and we have the capacity to do evil. Inside every single one of us. We have the capacity to tear down and destroy, but we also have the capacity to uplift and to build. This is in every single one of us. And this is complex, right? We have all these things within us at the same time. And so as a result, we want to keep this in mind when we're talking about the human beings involved in conflict. And as a corollary of that, recognizing that Israelis and Palestinians are human beings, not political abstractions, we want to dedicate ourselves to ensuring that we do not stereotype or demonize or objectify any of the communities in this conflict. So that's the first principle, and it's very critical to how we move forward in having difficult conversations. The second principle, which is my favorite principle, is that if you want to criticize anything, we have to criticize in order to uplift and empower, never to tear down or to destroy. So if I want to criticize an action of the Israeli government, I will criticize it knowing that ultimately I want Israelis to flourish. And if I want to criticize anti-Semitism within Palestinian political culture, I do so knowing that I ultimately want Palestinians to flourish. This is about rooting our intentions and anchoring our intentions in a positive space. I'll give you an example of how counterintuitive and hard it is to do that, but how powerful it can be. If I'm walking down the street and someone says to me, oh, you're a black person, and starts insulting me as a result of that, and starts saying all of these very mean things, I can respond to that one of two ways. I can start cursing that person out, and just being very irate, and perhaps I would be justified in doing that, right? So I could give his aggression back to him, right? Or I could call out that behavior as unacceptable, and I could say to that person, and you know what, I'm criticizing you because I expect more from you. I'm criticizing you because I know that you are capable of better than this, of more than this. And I'm criticizing you because I actually know and recognize your full potential, and I want you to achieve it. And that's very hard to do in that moment, but it can be incredibly transformative, not only for myself, but for the person I'm speaking to. There's a great quote from the poet Maya Angelou, where she says, if a person is not valued, if a person is told over and over again, you are nothing, you count for nothing, you are less than nothing, then that person will eventually say, oh, you think that I am nothing? Well, then I will show you where nothing comes. And then that person will end up acting even worse than how you have accused them of being. So a person can actually not develop character, integrity, a sense of integrity, unless he or she knows that they are valued and someone thinks that they are worth something. So she tells the story, this is another great pop culture reference. She tells the story where she was on set, a movie set with Tupac when he was younger, before in his teenage years. And Tupac was about to get into a fight with this guy on set. And he was cursing him out and all these various things. And Maya Angelou tries to get his attention, and she says, come here, let me talk to you. And Tupac keeps cursing this guy out and saying all these bad things, and then she goes, come here, let me talk to you. So finally she pulls him to the side and she says, don't you know that we need you? Don't you know that we are counting on you so much? Don't you know that you are the next generation and we're looking to you to build stuff for us and build the next generation? And it's an incredible story because in that moment, Tupac Shakur starts crying. And the tears start falling down his face. And the next day, he's still a little bit, he's still a little bit irate. And he's still a little bit full of a little more aggression against the guy that he almost got in a fight with. But then he sees Maya Angelou, and every time he sees her, he goes, good morning, Miss Angelou. And he straightens up, and he acts better in her presence, which is, again, an example of exactly what she said. A person cannot develop character unless they actually know that you care about them. So you can't criticize a person if you don't actually care about them, because it won't be influential. If I'm acting in a bad manner, right, and someone wants to criticize me and wants me to change, but they're going about it by saying, oh, you are worthless, right, or you are nothing, or you are less than nothing. What is the likelihood that I'm going to change my behavior based upon what that person is telling me? What is the likelihood that I'm going to say, oh yes, you're right, you're totally right, I'm worthless, so I will definitely change my behavior, which is harmful to you, right? But imagine the difference if that person would tell me while I'm engaging in this behavior that, you know what, you mean something to me, and I care about you, and that's why I think you should change this behavior. It totally changes the interaction, right? So we try to keep that in mind on an interpersonal level, and we try to keep that in mind even when we're analyzing and talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So that's the second principle. The third principle, which is the final principle and a summation of the theory of enchantment, is everything we do, we try to root in love and compassion. So what does that mean? That sounds very vague and non-descriptive. So how do we actually implement this? So this is very much related to the second principle. And essentially it means the following. It's sort of another step added to the second principle. It means that if I am being confronted on campus by someone who doesn't like me because they don't like my pro-Israel stance or whatever, and they start insulting me and calling me all these various names, I do two things. I tell that person, first of all, I don't know you from Adam, and I have no idea who you are, but what you're doing is really unacceptable and inappropriate, and calling me names and making assumptions, about me and all these things, and it's really, inappropriate. So that's what the first thing you do is you call out that behavior as unacceptable. But then the second thing you do is the hardest thing to do. You invite that person to break bread with you. You would say to that person, but you know what? I would love to have a conversation with you about this. And I would love to, in the process of having a conversation with you, actually get to know you. Because, quite frankly, in this moment, we don't actually know each other. We're making assumptions about each other. I'm sure even though I haven't said anything to you, I'm making assumptions about you right now, because this is how you've demonstrated your behavior to me. But I don't want to make assumptions about you. I want to actually get to know you and get to know where you're coming from. And maybe we can have a conversation where we might not agree on everything, but maybe the point isn't to agree on everything. Maybe the point is to bring back compassion and empathy, even in the midst of profound disagreement. That's hard. It's hard to say to someone who is being really obnoxious towards you, you know what, I want to invite you to come get coffee with me, or come to the bar with me, etc., so we can actually learn from each other and learn where we're both coming from and maybe come to a space of reconciliation. But that is what the Theory of Enchantment teaches, and that is its central aim. Again, not to come to agreement, but to bring back empathy and compassion, even in the midst of profound disagreement. So I'll tell you two real-world stories, and then one story from pop culture that supplements the third principle. The first story takes place at the University of Florida 2 years ago. There was a neo-Nazi by the name of Richard Spencer speaking, and a white nationalist wanted to go see him speak. Now, in order to go see him speak, and he was wearing a t-shirt with Nazi insignia on it. Now, in order to go see him speak, he had to get through a sea of protesters who were protesting outside the talk. And as soon as he gets into the sea of protesters, the protesters start spitting on him, pushing him, punching him in some cases. So he's trying to get through. And all of a sudden, this black man sees him, doesn't quite know what to do. There's a Nazi standing in front of him, doesn't quite know what to do. And so he is moved to do the only thing he feels compelled to do in that moment, which is to say he hugs him. And he pulls him close to him. And he says, "Why do you hate me? Why do you hate me? Why do you hate me?" Now, obviously, at this point, the neo-Nazi has no idea what to do. The object of his hatred is hugging him, right? Didn't see that one coming, right? And so he's moved to do the only thing he feels compelled to do in that moment, which is to say that he hugs him back. And he says to him, "I don't know." And this starts a whole series of conversations between this man and the black man and other members in the black community in Florida. And this individual has since disavowed his neo-Nazi association and is continuing to engage in conversations with the black community. Now imagine how easy it would have been for the black guy to just be like, to just curse him out, to just, say to him, "I don't give a damn about you, you don't give a damn about me." But he totally changed the entire, perhaps, course of this man's life by engaging in this different act of behavior, by essentially telling him that I will criticize you, but I will actually criticize you in order to uplift and empower you, not to tear you down and not to destroy you. So that's one story on sort of an interpersonal level, two people, right? But what about a whole society? Can an entire society be affected by this sort of approach? So the second story is about Rwanda. So in the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide, the prisons were overflowing with ex-murderers. It was virtually a fire hazard. And the government had to do something about this. And so the government made a decision to engage itself in a radical compassion, a program of radical compassion, which I have to be honest with you, quite frankly, is not something that I know or am 100% sure I could personally engage myself in. But it did, and it really uplifted an entire country. So what the government did was as follows. The government said, the prisons are overflowing, and we can't let this continue. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring pastors and therapists and sociologists into the prisons. We're going to talk to some of the prisoners. We're going to see if some of them are showing remorse about what they did. And those prisoners who show remorse, we're going to engage in a program of what's called restorative justice. So restorative justice, just to give you a summary of it, restorative justice instead of retributive justice, right? Restorative justice says that in order to enact justice, you have to restore both the lives of those involved in the crime and those affected by the crime. So the government of Rwanda says we're going to engage in restorative justice. So the first leg of restorative justice is some of the ex-murderers are going to restore the homes that they destroyed of the people in Rwanda. So many of these ex-murderers physically went back into the villages and restored the homes that they had destroyed. So that was the first leg of the program. Well, the second leg of the program had even more radical effects. The second leg of the program entailed the setting up of what was called gacaca court systems, which were court systems in local villages in Rwanda, where you would have a family member whose, let's say, son was murdered, and there would be a moderator, like a sort of arbiter of judgment, and the ex-murderer. And they would meet in the village, and they would talk. And in all the cases, the ex-murderers had to look the family members in the eye and ask them for forgiveness. Now, again, if I was a family member, if one of my relatives or friends was murdered, I don't know if I would be so moved as to do what many of these individuals did. But what happened next was actually quite remarkable, and it happened on the scale of an entire country. In many cases, not only did the family members forgive them, but in some cases, the family members ended up adopting them as their own children. Now let me put this into perspective. Let's say I had a son, and my son was murdered, and the murderer comes to me and asks me for forgiveness. Not only do I forgive him, but I adopt him as my own son. This is what happened on a massive scale across Rwanda. Thousands of people did this, and this resulted in the rehabilitation and reconciliation of an entire country. That's taking the idea of everything we do, we root in loving compassion on a whole other level. Which again, I don't know if I personally could do that. But it does show us what is possible. We often talk about what is possible in terms of the negative that we can create, the negative things that we as human beings can cultivate, right? But we rarely ever talk about the compassion that we can generate. But it's happened in many societies, Rwanda being one of them. And it's really remarkable, I think, to sit and think about the implications of that and of what's possible for our own societies and perhaps what's even possible when we talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So that's the theory of enchantment, and those two examples were from the real world, and I promised you a pop culture example, so I'll give you a pop culture example. How many of you have seen Moana? Oh, guys, oh my God.
It has a different name in Germany.
What is it in Germany?
Vaiana, yes.
Vaiana? Okay, one guy, okay. Okay, well, guys, we gotta work on our Disney here. I encourage you to watch Moana. It's one of the best Disney movies out the past 3 years or so. So this will be a bit of a spoiler alert, apparently. But it's still worth watching, so go watch it. Okay, so the storyline of Moana goes like this. Moana is on an island, she's from an island, and the island is really sick, it's really dying, there's no vegetation, because this evil goddess Teka, which is this lava-filled goddess who's full of rage and anger, has been destroying the island for some time. And if Moana doesn't go out to destroy Teka, the island is just going to be destroyed. So she has to go out and confront Teka. And there's another goddess, there's a more positive, gentler goddess named Tafiti. And Tafiti is the goddess of gardening and makes the island be full of great greenery and vegetation, right? But the problem is that Tafiti has been sleeping for a very long time. So Moana has to go restore the heart of Tafiti in order to destroy Teka. So this is the plot, right? It's a big adventure and it's Disney, so there are a lot of songs, which I won't get into, but this is essentially what is happening during Moana. So, at the very end, Moana comes to the culmination of her journey. She sees Teka from a distance. She sees Teka full of rage, obviously full on and intently trying to kill Moana, so Moana has to have courage. But at the moment of this confrontation, Moana has a realization. She has the heart of Tafiti in her hand. She looks down on it. She looks back at Taka, and she has this aha moment. Now, this is an interesting aesthetic moment because it looks like Moses going through the Red Sea and the seas are parting, but it's not Moses, it's Taka. But she has to walk through a sea that's splitting. So the sea is splitting, and she starts walking very weirdly confident, considering you're about to try to destroy an evil goddess that's raging and full of lava. So she's walking very smoothly. And then she gives this big speech because she just had this aha moment. And she says to Ka, I have crossed the horizon to find you. I know your name. They have stolen the heart from inside you, but this does not define you. And every time I see this scene in the movie, I am reminded of all of the various stories that I just told you. Because what happened when the young black man confronted the neo-Nazi in the sea of protesters, what he was essentially saying was, I have crossed the horizon to find you. They have stolen the heart from inside you, but this does not define you, right? This is what was happening when Maya Angelou confronted Tupac in that space. They have stolen the heart from inside you, but this does not define you. And in the moment where Moana sees Taka and she's holding this heart, this is her aha moment. This is her realization. She realizes that Taka and Tafiti are the same goddess. They're the exact same goddess. It's just that the heart was removed from her and she has to replace the heart or restore the heart of Tafiti back into Taka, and Taka will become once more her old self. And by leading with love and compassion, and by essentially telling Taka that she actually cares about her, she will restore her back to Tafiti. So that is the pop culture reference I promised you, and I really hope that all of you will now go out and go watch Moana, because it is an excellent film, and it obviously can teach us great lessons about life. So, that is the theory of enchantment. That is how I have chosen to lead when I have to give talks on college campuses. And my experience as a result of leading with this framework has been quite interesting, and I think really good. I think I'm able to have difficult conversations in a much more compassionate way with people who disagree with me. It takes the initial instinct to dehumanize one another out of the conversation, which makes all of our conversations for the better. So that is what I do. I have been in the sort of pro-Israel space for the past 7 years of my life, long time. And I will likely be actually sort of broadening my horizon over the next few years. I'm planning on starting a company based on the theory of enchantment and trying to take this theory not just to the pro-Israel world, not just to conversations about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but to other sectors of society. Because I don't know if you guys have this problem in Germany, but in America, with the rise of social media, we are finding that we are increasingly polarized, and we are increasingly in echo chambers and unable to talk to one another without dehumanizing each other. So I think we need a framework that can help change that and help challenge us to aspire to our better selves and to speak to each other in a spirit of generosity. Okay, so I've done enough speaking. I would love to turn it over to you guys and have a dialogue, hear feedback, hear concerns, etc. But besides all that, thank you for being a captive audience.